They told black soldiers to fight for American freedom in Vietnam. At the same time, they hung Confederate flags over American military bases and let cross burnings happen on American soil in Southeast Asia. While black men bled for democracy abroad, the U.S. military treated them like the enemy at home. Combat infantry squads packed with black soldiers, officer ranks wider than Mississippi country clubs, military prisons stuffed with black faces who dared to complain. This was not just war. This was betrayal dressed up in army green. The same government asking black men to die for liberty was denying them basic dignity on their own bases. What they experienced was a double war that almost tore the American military apart from the inside. But here is what the Pentagon never expected. Black soldiers did not just survive this system. They fought back, built brotherhood, and carved out resistance in the middle of a war zone. Today, we are talking about the stories they tried to bury. August 29, 1968, Long Binh Jail in South Vietnam, the largest military prison in the combat zone. Inside these walls, over 700 prisoners are crammed into space built for 400. Most of them are black. Most of them are there for crimes that white soldiers walk away from with a warning. The air is thick with anger that has been building for months. Then someone throws the first punch. Within hours, hundreds of black prisoners are fighting guards, tearing apart buildings, and setting fires that light up the Vietnamese night. One white prisoner dies in the chaos. The uprising spreads through the compound like a wildfire nobody saw coming. But the truth is, everyone should have seen it coming. This explosion at Long Binh was not random violence. It was 3 years of systematic racism finally erupting. And it was just the beginning of a crisis that would force the American military to face a truth they had been hiding from the American people. Black soldiers were fighting two enemies in Vietnam. The Viet Cong was just one of them. The other enemy wore the same uniform they did. By 1967, black men made up 11% of the American population, but 23% of Army combat deaths. They were getting killed at double the rate because they were getting assigned to the most dangerous jobs at double the rate. Infantry, point man, search and destroy missions, the positions where you die first and die most. Meanwhile, the safe jobs, the rear jobs, the technical positions that kept you away from bullets stayed whiter than a country club. When black soldiers tried to complain, they got labeled troublemakers. When they demanded equal treatment, they got courts-martial. The same military that bragged about being integrated since 1948 was running a racial caste system in the middle of a war zone. That detail matters, so do not lose it. By the way, if you want more hidden stories like this, subscribe to Black Stories Untold. Now, back to what happened next. Picture walking into your barracks and seeing a Confederate battle flag hanging over American military equipment. Picture seeing K-boobs displayed like trophies while you are supposed to be fighting for American values. Picture crosses burning on American military bases while your commanding officers call it harmless regional pride. This was daily life for black soldiers at bases like Cam Ranh Bay and Da Nang. White soldiers would blast country music that celebrated the Confederacy. They would use racial slurs as casual conversation. They would make jokes about lynching while cleaning weapons they might use to save your life in combat. And when black soldiers reported this harassment, commanders treated it like a personality conflict. Boys will be boys. Unit morale. Do not rock the boat. The same army asking these men to die for freedom was telling them to shut up and take racist abuse with a smile. But black soldiers were not staying quiet. They were building something the military had never seen before. Underground networks of solidarity that stretched across Vietnam. They called it the DAP. Elaborate black power handshakes that could last 5 minutes. Every movement had meaning. Every gesture said, "We see you. We know you. We got your back." White officers hated the DAP. They saw it as threatening. Some bases tried to ban it as insubordination, but you cannot ban brotherhood. Black soldiers grew out their hair. They gave black power salutes. They played Motown and James Brown loud enough to rattle the whole fire base. They created underground newspapers with names like G.I. Says and The Bond that told the truth about racism in the ranks. This was not just cultural expression. This was psychological warfare against a system trying to break their spirits. The military tried to control the narrative. They put out press releases about successful integration. They highlighted the few black officers they promoted. They talked about unity and shared sacrifice, but reality was exploding in their faces. October 12, 1972, the USS Kitty Hawk, an aircraft carrier in the Gulf of Tonkin. Racial tensions that had been simmering for months finally boiled over. Black and white sailors fought running battles through the ship's corridors. 60 men involved in violence that left dozens injured, and the Navy scrambling to cover up the biggest racial incident in naval history. Just like Long Binh, commanders acted shocked. Just like Long Binh, they blamed outside agitators and black troublemakers instead of looking at the system they were running. Here is where everything connects. These explosions were not isolated incidents. They were symptoms of a military that had confused integration with equality. They had put black and white soldiers in the same units, but kept all the power in white hands. Less than 3% of officers were black throughout the entire war. That meant black soldiers were taking orders from white officers who often came from the same segregated communities they were trying to escape. Officers who had never lived around black people were making life and death decisions for black soldiers. Officers who dismissed complaints about racism as attitude problems. Officers who saw black culture and solidarity as threats to military discipline instead of responses to military discrimination. And this is where it gets darker. The military justice system was not just failing black soldiers, it was actively hunting them. Black servicemen were getting Article 15 non-judicial punishment at rates that defied explanation. They were getting courts-martial for offenses that got white soldiers a talking to. They were getting dishonorable discharges that would follow them for life, while white soldiers got chances to straighten up. Long Binh Jail was not just overcrowded. It was deliberately packed with black faces because the military was criminalizing black resistance while ignoring white racism. Every black soldier who complained about discrimination was labeled a potential troublemaker. Every act of cultural pride was seen as potential rebellion. The system was not broken. It was working exactly as designed. But what the Pentagon did not understand was that black soldiers were watching, learning, and organizing. They were connecting what they saw in Vietnam to what they knew about America. When Martin Luther King was assassinated on April 4, 1968, black soldiers in Vietnam held memorial services and talked about what it meant to be fighting for a country that just killed their greatest leader. When they saw footage of police attacking civil rights protesters, they started asking why they were fighting for Vietnamese freedom when black Americans did not have freedom at home. The war was supposed to distract from domestic inequality. Instead, it was creating a generation of black veterans who understood exactly how the system worked because they had seen it up close with guns in their hands. The full picture is even bigger than individual racism or bad commanders. The Vietnam War coincided with the civil rights movement, and the military became a laboratory for racial control. How do you maintain white dominance when black men are carrying weapons and learning combat skills? How do you keep black soldiers loyal when they are fighting for values America denies them at home? The answer was a sophisticated system of psychological warfare designed to break black identity while extracting black bodies for combat. Segregate them culturally while integrating them militarily. Give them the most dangerous jobs while denying them leadership positions. Punish them for organizing while rewarding them for dying quietly. It was slavery updated for the modern military. By 1971, the crisis was so severe that the Pentagon finally admitted they had a problem. They created the Defense Race Relations Institute and started mandatory racial sensitivity training. Too little, too late, and totally missing the point. Black soldiers did not need white soldiers to like them better. They needed equal treatment, fair assignments, and justice when they were wronged. The military solution was to teach white soldiers to hide their racism more politely while keeping the power structure exactly the same. Black veterans remember these programs as insults added to injury, workshops about cultural understanding while the Confederate flags kept flying. Here is what really happened in Vietnam. Black soldiers faced down two armies and beat them both. They survived combat that was designed to consume them disproportionately. They survived a military justice system designed to criminalize their existence. They survived psychological warfare aimed at destroying their identity and pride. And they did not just survive, they thrived. They built culture that sustained them. They created bonds that lasted lifetimes. They developed political consciousness that would fuel decades of activism. They came home with skills, confidence, and a deep understanding of how power really works in America. The system tried to use them up and throw them away. Instead, it created a generation of Black veterans who could not be lied to about American democracy because they had seen the truth up close. The stories of Long Binh and the Kitty Hawk were not failures of military discipline. They were successes of Black resistance. When peaceful complaints were ignored, Black soldiers found other ways to be heard. When cultural pride was criminalized, they made it revolutionary. When the system tried to divide them, they built unity that crossed every line the military drew. The explosions that terrified white commanders were actually proof that the system had failed to break Black spirits. Every act of resistance was a victory against a machine designed to crush dissent. And this is why these stories were buried for decades. The Pentagon could not admit that their integrated military was actually a racial hierarchy. They could not admit that Black soldiers were fighting harder for equality in American barracks than Vietnamese soldiers were fighting for independence in Vietnamese jungles. They could not admit that the real threat to military order was not enemy combat, but American racism. So they classified the reports, downplayed the incidents, and let the myth of successful integration cover up the reality of systematic oppression. But Black soldiers kept their own records. They told their own stories. They preserved their own truth. Oral histories that survived official censorship, photographs that documented what really happened, underground newspapers that told the real story while the mainstream media repeated Pentagon lies, letters home that captured the daily reality of racism in uniform. The evidence was there the whole time. It just took decades for America to be ready to listen. Today, those Black Vietnam veterans are finally getting their due. Their stories are being told in documentaries, books, and museums that refuse to sanitize the truth. Their resistance is being recognized as heroic, not criminal. Their survival is being celebrated as triumph, not accident. The system that tried to break them failed completely. They are still here. They are still proud. They are still telling the truth about what really happened when Black soldiers were asked to fight for an America that was fighting against them. The lesson of Vietnam is not about military tactics or foreign policy. It is about what happens when Black Americans are given weapons, training, and a front row seat to watch how power really works. They see through the lies. They organize for justice. They refuse to be used without being respected. They build something beautiful and strong in the middle of something ugly and destructive. They survive everything thrown at them and come out the other side with their dignity intact and their eyes wide open. That is the story they tried to bury. That is the legacy that cannot be erased.